Hi, everyone, and welcome to BoomStartup Accelerator's OpenUp webinar. My name is Tara Spalding. I'm the Managing Director of BoomStartup Accelerator, and it is my pleasure to be hosting you today. Thank you so much for joining us live and virtually. This is going to be a really fun and insanely insightful program today. And in fact, we have 4 amazing panelists who I'm going to introduce later. First, I would love to thank the sponsors for BoomStartup Accelerator. First is Assure, then Greenberg Traurig, now CFO, 212, Outcode, and Lateral Solutions. If you're new to BoomStartup Accelerator, welcome. It's my pleasure to host you. Our vision and purpose is to give you, the founders, an aha moment on how to improve your business. Our programs are all about online and opt-in participation, and in fact, we consider ourselves to be the most inclusive accelerator in the world. How do we do this? We have a combination of our online platform that's monitoring your participation in programs like this, as well as your quarterly business growth. And we also match you with our different programs such as this and mentors, and continue to track your success. Ultimately, when you hit a funding event, we're here to support you to learn more about raising capital and what to do. We serve companies with various business models and industries from around the world. In fact, here's a quick snapshot from those that we helped. In 2021, we worked with over 1,000 companies in 2021, and to date in 2022, we've worked with over 800 from around the world. Last year, we worked with companies from 49 countries that want to basically learn the American way for business operations and fundraising. This year, we've already surpassed 56 countries. We measure success when you, the founder, have a learning opportunity. And that can happen by basically understanding a little bit more about your business maturity and getting the right sort of guidance, how to invest, prepare for investments and look at capital resources as well as capital structuring. And last and certainly most importantly is investment strategies. For a superlative group who understand more about becoming a better first-time founder, we work with funding. We can also vouch for the authenticity and the growth of your business, because every time you work with us and our mentors, we're tracking your progress and what you get done. Most importantly, we have Amplify Up, a funding program that can help raise your first institutional round. Our 4 programs include PitchUp, which is an open global pitch competition, OpenUp, which are online webinars such as this, Rise Up, which are week-long sprints led by experts, and Amplify Up, our funding program. Amplify Up is a 12-week online course that is incredibly immersive with 80 hours of training and presentation work, in addition or outside of homework as well. And we focus on basically educating you about your term sheet, your valuation, your financials, your go-to-market strategy, and we also help get you funding through the Assure SPV. If you are interested as a founder to apply for Amplify Up, please go to boomstartup.com/amplifyup and complete our quarterly business survey. Just 2 days ago, we finished our Amplify cohort and completed the demo day, which Aubrey, one of our guests, signed up to participate in. Now, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. As mentioned, Aubrey Murray is going to be our moderator today. Aubrey is the president of Perpetual Storage Incorporated. Aubrey, thank you so much for being here and for pulling together this panel. I'd also like to quickly introduce, before I hand you the floor, Romaine Marshall from Polsinelli, and he's coming in from Washington, D.C. He's in this fabulous jacket I'm quite jealous of. Romaine, thank you so much for being on our panel. And we also have Steve Sumption from Sumption Business Law. Steve, you're coming in from Utah, right?
Yeah, yes, the greatest snow on earth, and it's a little bit cold right now, getting ready for that dump.
I know. Well, and I like the graphics in the background. You have the Utah with the mountains with snow on it. So you're right. I sense a sign in your background. And of course, we have Tara Anderson from Framework Security, who's coming in from Washington. Hey.
Great.
Thank you so much for joining. Aubrey, you know, cybersecurity for startup, you and I have been talking about this for a while. You know, why is this so important for entrepreneurs? And I'll let you take it over from here.
Thanks so much, Tara, and thank you for hosting this. It's a really great opportunity, and I feel so honored to be with this panel of experts that really have a deep knowledge in what we're going to talk about. And so that's the question, right? So what is cybersecurity? Why is it important for startups to consider cybersecurity while building their business? And if they continue building their business without cybersecurity in mind, what's at stake? And so that's really what we're going to explore here today. So I'm going to start as though who I'm talking to knows nothing about cybersecurity. So excuse me if it seems a little elementary, but what is cybersecurity? So Cisco defines cybersecurity as the practice of protecting systems, networks, and programs from digital attacks. These cyber attacks are usually aimed at accessing, changing, or destroying sensitive information, extorting money from users, or interrupting normal business processes. And so then you might say, well, what's a cyber attack? Now, a lot of people have heard ransomware being thrown around. There's denial of service attacks, supply chain attacks, phishing and social engineering based attacks, internet facing service risks, misuse of information, and network related and man-in-the-middle attacks. Oh, and supply chain attacks. These are the main ones that we're going to talk about today. So I'm moderating. I'm mostly just going to be asking our experts what they think about all of this. So Tara Anderson, you're with Framework Security. Framework Security is a cybersecurity consulting company. That's how I introduce you.
Right.
What else am I missing from that? Tell us what you do.
Oh, no, that's great. Cybersecurity consulting is 100% of what we do. And how that's broken down and how we help businesses. We do that a few different ways. Some companies are in regulated industries, so they need to have regular risk assessments done for their industry. They have to have regular penetration done. There's requirements of those industries. So we help them meet those requirements naturally and then remediate on the findings. So we identify whether they're weak, whether they're strong, and then we help them fix it. Other companies, we work in a much more interesting way. And so I'll focus some of our work to this discussion. We offer a virtual CISO service. So many companies, especially startups or high growth companies, they can't afford a $300,000 chief information security officer. So we offer one virtually, fractionally, to come in and help it in key critical areas of the company, excuse me. Another way we help is in incubators. So companies want to innovate, they want to innovate quickly, but they need to have cybersecurity top of mind while they do without it holding them back. So we'll come in and work in the incubator space, which is really fun because sometimes these are big organizations that have been around a long time, but they can have a startup inside of their organization that's working to innovate. And that's a space that we really enjoy coming in and working on. Lastly, cybersecurity due diligence. So we work on both sides of this transaction, pre and post. Investors, they may want us to come in and do due diligence on a target. So a company such as yourselves that may be looking to take on some investment, they want to basically de-risk that investment and look at potential setbacks or risks that could happen if they were to either absorb that company or invest. We also help, post-transaction, implementing new solutions, looking for redundancies, gaps, things that have been sitting on the shelf that need to be implemented. So we look at how the companies marry together and then keep cybersecurity top of mind. But that's how we work with a lot of high growth companies and startups. But again, cybersecurity is all we do, and we do a whole bunch of it. So thanks for asking.
Awesome. So, okay, let's just start with you and Tara, if you don't mind. So if the company is not in finance or healthcare, why would cyber criminals target startups and small businesses? And what do these companies have to lose, and what's at risk for them?
Awesome question. I like this question because I've been naive in my entire adult life and in my career. I thought that cyber criminals, they were from the Italian Job or Ocean's 11, and they picked their target, and then they pursued them over the course of months to a year, and they are after high value information, or money, valuables, information, and it was very well calculated. And that's real obvious by the vaults that banks have, the steel vaults. Even PSI has a vault like this, several hundred tons of steel, armed guards. It's indicating there's something behind this that's very protected and valuable and sensitive. And healthcare is the same way. We value our information. It's very sensitive to most people and patients. And cyber criminals can evoke a lot of damage by attacking financial institutions and hospitals. So that's real obvious to most non-criminals that those two industries are highly targeted. They should be, and they are, right? But who else is impacted by cybercrime? Then I go to this, like the streets of, say, New York or Chicago. Think of the pickpocketer. They're opportunistic criminals. They're fast, they're quick. That's a numbers game. They can get in, get out, get in, get out, get in, get out. And it's really a lucrative career. So yes, the Ocean's 11 still exists. Italian Job, cyber gangs, they exist. And some of them do, especially in nation states, spend months or years plotting out the perfect attack, right? And they do that against their governments, against each other. It's high value. It's a one-time deal, or they're able to stay in and obtain information for several years. Others are more like pickpocketers. They go to startups that maybe don't have the best defenses in place because they don't have budget, or they don't see themselves as a target. They go in, they disable systems, and they ask for ransom. And they do that often. And so that's, another side of this that small businesses and startups need to be prepared for. Another reason why a startup or small business could be targeted is because they're connected to those larger targets. They're part of a longer entail game. So by getting into, say, a badging company, by breaching their system, that may give them access to something bigger. I know I can tell you that there are several startups that work with much larger enterprises. There's great startups right up and down I-15 in Utah that have amazing innovations and large clients such as the Fortune 100, 500. And unfortunately, by attacking them, that allows them to daisy chain into these larger organizations. So that's essentially why any business could be a target. Another example would be private information in regards to IP, competitive intelligence. A startup, as you have great innovations. This is why we love the startup space. There's a lot going on, smart ideas, great innovations. There's a lot of IP. So that needs to be guarded and protected as well. So many different reasons why a criminal would want to get access. Most of us non-criminals just think about banks and we think about healthcare. Both, again, industries are seeing a serious amount of attacks. But as far as the everyday startup, you're absolutely a target. Just think about carrying around that wallet that's exposed to cyber criminals. They're just opportunistic and bottom feeders, to be frank. So yeah, unfortunately, we're all impacted.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I also want to say that for our other panelists, please feel free to jump in after the first person has done their talk. So I know Steve, Romaine, you might have ideas about what's at risk and what's at stake for these companies. Would you have anything else to add to what Tara said?
Oh, I'll just add reputation risk.
Yeah, right.
And business continuity losses. One of the key tenets of cybersecurity is availability of information. There's reference, we talk about the cybersecurity triad, the CIA triad, where the three most important elements or concepts of cybersecurity are to protect confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And availability cyber attacks affect the bottom line by just not being able to get things to users or employees or clients when they want them. For example, electricity. and water and wastewater treatment and oil and gas. We saw an example of that last year with the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, and that was relatively minor to how bad that could have been, but they still had gas pumps emptied out over multiple days in a large area of the country. So those kinds of related issues to everything that Tara said, which is great.
Thank you.
On the micro level, what we're seeing our clients and personally, a lot more of these creative ways to get at the zero-sum dollar, a very creative phishing attacks, PHIS, not with a poll, but the phishing attacks are creating a great opportunity for thieves to intercept money. We had a small contractor in a rural community accepting funds over the internet through some traditional payment methods, and the CFO or assistant was deceived into redirecting payment that was going to be made to our contractor was intercepted for over $1 million for work. This was a small company, really, 15 employees, and the cash is king, right? And so many times we think of these problems as being the Facebook large mega corporation kind of problem, but it really is at the heart of every person's bank account is exposed, business or personal.
Thanks so much, Steve. Now, going back to Tara, I think you might have already addressed this in its entirety, but if there's anything else you want to add, you broke out finance and healthcare from the startup and business and small business group. Do you want to go into more detail about why breaking that out from this conversation?
Oh, absolutely. I broke it out because when I talk to customers, and many times it's obviously non-criminals that I'm talking to that they don't think like criminals. So I broke these out because we obviously understand, much due to the credit of the headlines, that healthcare is getting hit really heavily with ransomware and breaches. It's actually increasing mortality rates because it's decreasing patient care. If systems are going down, they're not able to provide care, see records. It's really problematic. And in finance, banking information was very sought after, on the dark web, right? You could sell credit card numbers on the dark web and banking information. And in society, traditionally, those two industries have been highly protected. And it's really just obvious. And so when I talk to a lot of startups specifically, it's typically the great story of a couple of us in a garage, or a couple of us in an apartment, or a co-working space, and they typically have their own devices. And what I hear most commonly is, I'm not storing anything valuable. And that's surprising to me. They neglect to even recognize how valuable their innovation is, that their IP is, that their company is. Some of them could be selling coffee mugs, really cool, like Ski Utah coffee mugs or whatever it might be, but they're collecting card information and addresses. Others, are collecting data that they just don't realize it's valuable. And for a criminal, everything is valuable to a criminal. I've worked for several startups in my tenure, in the state of Utah, and one of them we sold tablet enclosures. And so I hope I'm going to tell a story here, but we sold tablet enclosures, and we were small, about a team of 7. We like to have lunches on Friday. We scooted around. We did all the ping pong, but we also did is we had our own devices because, we're cool. We're savvy. We had our own devices. We liked our Macs. We liked our setups. I was ignorant. I left my laptop sitting on the front seat of my car. I went into Smith's for about 5 minutes and it got grabbed. I was actually highly targeted. What they were after was not necessarily the credit cards that we were storing from the consumers that we sold to online, which was, you know, obviously its own problem. And we had a lot of disclosures that needed to happen around that consumer data that got out, the card information. But they were after the clients we were selling to. Although we were very small, our client list back in this day, it was 2011. So I think it's safe to talk about Apple, Hawaiian Air, McDonald's, Home Depot. The list could go on, but you can imagine very targeted organizations, and our little team of 7 that like to scoot around and play ping pong. We housed all that information on our devices, and it was a really problematic situation for our company. And we did suffer some reputational loss and some issues for quite a while because of that. We recovered, but now they don't need me to be ignorant and not very smart to leave my laptop sitting on my seat to be snatched and grabbed. They can get in digitally. They can get in online through the doors that we leave unlocked everywhere in our digital perimeters. So that's why I broke those out. But, you know, if you're a startup with 2 to, 50 employees, and you don't think that you're selling anything valuable because you're just putting the enclosure around a tablet, how sensitive is that? Think twice about the information that you're gathering and the people that you're working with and the vendors that you provide services to. Because what was telling was, in this particular case, there was a growth. You could see by our transaction that there's going to be a very strategic growth between 2 different companies that we were working with. If you're selling uniforms to the military, you're stitching up uniforms, but in the military orders several $100,000, that could be, an indication to a nation state or another bad actor that there could be an act of war on the horizon as well. So just kind of think about who would benefit from the information. Again, it could be a sophisticated criminal and organized, crime gang that spends several months to a year, or it could be the pickpocketers that just want to take you down and realize that you need to get back up to speed quickly, and you can't afford anything to get in the news that could harm your reputation. And so they're preying on the fact that you're going to pay them and pay them quickly.
Thanks so much. I think
Yeah,
that's
you're
a really relatable story, Tara, in a big way. I think that all of us think that we're safe until we're not. So I think that's actually a really good segue to Romaine. So Romaine, what are the legal ramifications for companies that don't have their cybersecurity dialed in?
Yeah, thanks, Aubrey. Thanks, Tara. In a word, uncertainty. And I'll give an example. I was in Vancouver in June 2019. It was July 2019, and I got a call from a healthcare facility, a chain. They have a chain of facilities in Utah County, and they had told me they think they were experiencing a ransomware attack, but they weren't sure. And because this was a healthcare facility, they had 3 obligations if they were experiencing a ransomware attack. And it turns out that it was a ransomware attack. And under HIPAA, you have 60 days to do 3 things. Notify the patients whose information may have been somehow compromised through the exfiltration of their patient information that was used as part of the ransom. You have 60 days to notify them, notify media that it happened, and then notify the Department of Health and Human Services Office for Civil Rights Division. And then they open an investigation. So now it's more than 3 years later, and that investigation by the Office for Civil Rights Division of the Health and Human Services Department is still undergoing. And we are still responding to requests for information about our cybersecurity, my client's cybersecurity program, for them to determine whether or not they should seek to levy fines and penalties relating to an alleged breach of the HIPAA requirements. And so one thing we did well in that case, and is often the case in these cyber attacks, is good companies react and respond really well. They throw resources and people at it, and they learn. And they implement the things that perhaps they could have had implemented beforehand, but just didn't have the time, wherewithal, or understanding of what was required. but the good companies, they respond quickly. Legally, that can sometimes do nothing for you. In other words, litigation can still happen when you've cleaned up your mess the best way possible, and litigation can drag on. And so to me, there's business reputation, business continuity, and then this is the other risk to cyber attacks, is just the uncertainty of legal ramifications. I talked about regulatory ramifications, and that exists in most industries. If you deal with consumers, then the Federal Trade Commission is going to investigate you if you had a breach that was that seems negligent, but may necessarily not be. You may still get investigated. The SEC is going to investigate companies who collect financial information or who provide financial advice, because that's who's under their jurisdiction. And those investigations, like I mentioned with the one with the Department of Health and Human Services, can just drag on for an indeterminate amount. Now, litigation is a little more predictable, but not by much as far as how long it can drag on for. And since COVID's happened, courtrooms and court dockets and the things that judges have to do have slowed down. And there's a backlog of issues that they're trying to work through. So litigation is another uncertainty and uncertain ramification of a data breach too. And then the type of claims that are asserted in a litigation context, negligence mostly, are still not well developed to the point where an organization can say, this judge or this jury in this jurisdiction decided on facts that are similar to ours that the party wasn't negligent, and this jury should do the same. There's still not a large body of case law, because cybersecurity and data privacy are still relatively new areas of law. And so uncertainty is where the legal intersection of attacks and the legal ramifications really peak. And that's not good for business planning. And that's not good for relationships that businesses have with their partners. And so doing some of the things that Tara's talked about and that we're going to talk about beforehand, so those things can happen, can speed up a determination of the legal ramifications and provide more certainty.
Thanks, Romaine.
You're welcome.
Okay, so with that in mind, Steve, Utah has been one of the states at the forefront of actually enacting cybersecurity legislation. Could you please take a few minutes to describe what Utah's Cybersecurity Affirmative Defense Act is and why it's important for businesses both in Utah and outside of Utah?
This is really a forefront for Utah in what we refer to in Utah as UCADA, Utah's Affirmative Defense, Utah's Affirmative Cybersecurity Affirmative Defense Act. This is House Bill 80 that came through last year, and really one of the first states to take that proactive step for business. You may have seen many of the national surveys put Utah at the top of their list for places to do business. And I'd like to think that this legislation is just one of those elements, besides low taxes and a great talent pool. But this act creates an opportunity for companies to create an affirmative defense by taking certain measures within the company to mitigate some type of cyber attack. And Romaine here is going to talk a little bit more about the WISP document, a written information security plan. But what we have done in connection with this to take advantage of Utah's UCADA Act is to embrace the legislation by creating our own WISP document. And within that, we name Aladar. Aladar is a 27-year lawyer from Brazil who has a lot of compliance experience. And Aladar has taken the lead for our law firm. We have some 30, 35 professionals providing legal services to businesses. And we have decided to anoint Aladar as the czar for cybersecurity. What does that lead to? That leads to the document being prepared. That leads to staff meetings where our IT director gets up on a regular basis and talks about measures that should be taken, because we have a relatively higher rotation through the firm. It's very important to train new people coming in, and that there's an exposure. We all know that some of the greatest vulnerabilities are with new staff members, and so that training is important. Backing up the information, making sure there's a backup and perpetual storage. Inc. PSI, Aubrey's company. If you haven't ever been to that facility, is just amazing. And to think that that's a great resource to be able to, on a weekly, monthly, if not daily process, take advantage of in your WISP document to say our IT director is responsible for backing up our data, so that that one of the key strategies for what we hear about ransomware is hey, if you have that backup in a safe deposit, then the amount of money they can exact from you is going to be much smaller. So this legislation creates, as Romaine mentioned, a negligence action. A very effective defense would be to say, we have taken proactive steps, documented them, and created this affirmative defense against parties that would claim that we have been negligent in the way we've handled their client information. And so that becomes a great opportunity for Utah, not just Utah companies, but these principles are not just Utah. These are nationwide. I was at a Chief Legal Officer Summit in Chicago just a month ago, and they were taking time among all the other topics to emphasize with chief legal officers from billion-dollar companies the importance of a WISP document and taking those proactive steps. And in one phrase, we have learned from our clients that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. The litigation process is very painful, costly, and unnecessary. And one of the greatest defenses is Utah's UCADA to benefit and businesses and be pro-business here.
Thanks. I have a follow-up question to this, actually. So, and this is open to any of our panelists that want to answer. How does legislation by the state or legislation federally around cybersecurity change the way that businesses handle their cybersecurity?
Oh, I think so. I'll take a shot at that, Aubrey. I think it provides more certainty around what the standards are, or what the duty is of an organization that collects data towards how they should secure it. And for years, there's been uncertainty, and organizations have had to guess or rely on others within their industry, or trade associations, or industry groups to kind of establish what the standard should be. And it's difficult in a world where the threat is constantly evolving. But if there's no flaw, or if there's no framework, then constantly changing and staying up to pace with the threat actors, and then the parallel standards is very, very difficult. So laws help in at least setting a standard through which companies can judge themselves, and then also business partners can judge the companies they provide information to. we as consumers and employees can also have a standard through which when we go and give our personal information to our employers or to a service provider we know what their obligations are, and we can. So it's always going to be a risk to give over our information for the types of things we want in return. It shouldn't have to be that way. We shouldn't have to be thinking this is risky. This is a company I don't know enough about, but I sure like their service. The laws put some structure around that risk and say, no, you as an organization have to meet this threshold when it comes to security. And that's what, what Steve was talking about with what Utah has done through UKDA.
Also, the insurance factor, when you meet that legislative standard, it creates an opportunity for a insurance company to lower the premium for the insurance coverage for cyber attacks.
That's a really good point. Because our audience is startups, right, for this webinar, if you guys were to suggest a framework that they look at because they don't really know where to start with their cybersecurity planning, is there a framework that you would suggest more than others, or a place that they could go to find out where they should start with putting together their cybersecurity plan?
I'll come off mute for that one, because framework is in our name, obviously, and obviously we say this a number of times that we're framework nerds, which we are. The one that we're liking right now is CIS 18, formerly CIS 20. You might recognize it that way. It's we've shaved a few controls off of it. The reason why we advise to go CIS 18 for most startups is because it's more modern. It addresses more modern business issues like remote work, even COVID. So it looks at, kind of where we're at as a professional society now. It's comprised of industry experts. There's hundreds of experts that come together to build this framework. And it seems to be the most approachable. And what I mean by that, it takes a very nice common sense approach to it, where there can be some that are really comprehensive, and they don't address more like the technology startups, the people that are working from home and trying to make that work. So that would be my approach, to go CIS 18 and kind of go from there. But there are industries such as government subcontractors that need to conform to CMMC 27001, because that's a requirement right now from the federal government to keep procuring those government contracts. So it can be industry specific. CIS 18, again, it's modern, it's more adaptable, seems to be a little bit more common sense, and then addresses multiple different industries and verticals.
Thank you. That's really great.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm gonna get back on script. I've kind of taken us on a tangent for a little bit, and I want to also give Romaine and Steve time to introduce themselves. So Romaine, I'll go to you first with their next question, and then Steve, when we come back to you, I'll give you some time to just talk about what you do. So Romaine, could you just tell us about what you specialize in at your law firm?
Sure. So I'm at Polsonelli as a cybersecurity and data privacy lawyer, and my background training is in litigation and trial work. And that most of that litigation and trial work leading up to becoming a cybersecurity lawyer revolved around fighting over money. So it's in the civil context and fighting over money in lots of different contexts. Where that has diverged a little bit in the cybersecurity context is I mostly just advise and help clients stay away from the lawsuits or the investigations that may result from a cybersecurity attack, in which attack information is lost, vulnerabilities are exposed, and just negative consequences exist. And so I advise, I defend in lawsuits, sometimes I defend in regulatory investigations, by all those agencies I mentioned before. Sometimes I bring lawsuits on behalf of aggrieved consumers who have had their things stolen from the platforms they use. And I've done that against companies like Coinbase, the crypto exchange, and also OpenSea, the NFT exchange. And so it's there's never a dull moment in this space. As some of you will have observed, the federal government has taken a much more active role in regulating what certain types of industries do with the things they have. So, for example, oil and gas, electrical utilities, water and waste treatment facilities are now coming under closer inspection for some of the things that we've been talking about. They're being required to attest to meeting certain cybersecurity standards, because the thinking is there, hey, we've had it bad for several years by getting those letters telling us that our favorite retailer or restaurant or hotel has been hacked, but it's going to be way, way worse when hacking incidents happen to critical infrastructure companies like those that I just mentioned. If we have a grid attack in Salt Lake Valley in the middle of summer or middle of winter, that will be devastating. And cyber actors are readying their abilities and improving their ability to deploy the type of malware that can just shut stuff down and limit our availability to services we like. So
Yeah, I think that puts a really real spin on why cybersecurity is important and not something that people think about a lot.
Yeah.
We're getting close. I think we have 7 minutes left before we get to the Q&A time. So there's a few questions I want to get through, but Romaine,
yeah,
how can lawyers help their clients protect themselves with WISP documentation, like Steve mentioned a few minutes ago, and why is this documentation important?
okay. So in a WISP, the three main requirements. So a WISP, as Steve explained, is the intent of a WISP is to establish an organization's security program. It's for them to be intentional about it and to set forth what they're going to do to keep data secure, their infrastructure and environment secure, and so forth. And the three main aspects of WISPs that I've worked on have had to do with physical security, so a building itself and keys and alarms and things like that, and then administrative controls, which has to do with how an organization monitors, how they are securing things. And then the last set of controls are the technical controls. And that's where WISP mostly requires technical help. And I don't do that. I'm a lawyer. I just am there if that isn't done properly and someone gets sued about it, or if someone asks me, hey, how can I better legally protect myself? How can I abide by the law? I say, get a WISP, and then I work with a technical consultant to get what they need. And so I don't provide that, but I provide the legal basis for why they need it. And I provide them the legal support that they may need if they get questioned about their WISP, or if they get asked why, even though they had a WISP, they still had a data breach. Litigation can arise from that because it can be asserted that you don't get a pass just because you had a WISP. Your WISP must have been deficient. And so there are disputes that arise around just trying to be secure, and when you haven't been secure successfully. So I can navigate and update clients on what their legal obligations are, but they have to do them. I can't do them for them, but it's appreciated, I hope, that they know what those are and that they know what needs to be done for them to be compliant. Not me to make them compliant, but for me to advise them as to what the standards are. So there's some security in that, and it's generally appreciated type of service, because it's a patchwork of laws and it's confusing, and there's always new ones. And so I just try to provide some clarity.
Thanks. Steve, I'm actually going to put something over to you. Could you talk a little bit about how companies benefit from that attorney-client privilege when it comes to some kind of cyber attack.
This is one of the most sacred parts of the law that is predictable. Attorney-client privilege, you may recall some of the TV shows and books that talk a little bit about this, but we deal with a lot of ambiguity and reasonable man standard or reasonable woman standard. But the one thing that in the law is very important from a cybersecurity standpoint is in your WISP document to identify counsel and to use that as an avenue to protect against the phishing expedition or the communications that can be openly discussed via text message, via email, or in a conference room. If you got your lawyer in there, you have a valid argument that is an attorney-client privilege communication and cannot be used against you. And so that tool, that resource to have lawyer on retainer that can be involved and referenced in your WISP document to, all right, when we have this question as to how far do we have to go to disclose or remediate or resolve this data breach, that all those communications can be deemed confidential in figuring out how to do it. Now, of course, for certain public companies and certain serious breaches, ultimately that needs to be reported in many cases, but there's a lot of discretion as to whether or not that is required. And you don't want that rogue employee saying, oh, you have got to report this, and if that's not attorney-client privilege, then that can be used as a basis to say that the company was negligent in not following that rogue employee's commentary. So you have a process for bringing everyone together to powwow with the CEO, the lawyer, the CISO, the IT director, and sales and operations to decide, all right, how far do we have to go? So that umbrella of protection is something you want to take advantage of, the attorney-client privilege.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very comprehensive answer, and I think that businesses would be well prepared by taking that into account when they're thinking about, okay, I've experienced a breach. What's my next step? You know, do I call my lawyer first? Do I call the insurance company first? And at what point is the communication protected? And I think we've got a question about that from the audience. So I'm going to actually bring that up a little bit later. Tara, there's a couple questions that I really want to make sure that we ask for startups specifically. So I'm going to combine them. What are areas where cybersecurity risk impacts companies' valuations? And what are some steps companies can take to improve investor confidence in their businesses?
Oh, great questions. And I imagine this group cares because they're raising capital or thinking about raising capital. They're looking at selling their companies down the road. Maybe they're pursuing IPO or trying to take their company public, or just quite, two different scenarios. They want to measure their growth over time, like any business owner would. And they probably have a great team that they want to issue shares to, and they need to be able to formulate and have a solid valuation. Now, back when I was consulting startups and working with, private equity funds and firms and VCs, due diligence was done just very basic way. Well, I don't want to say basic. It's never been basic, but this is what was typically covered. Sales, leadership, they looked at operations, they looked at technology, they projected future revenues, they looked at the market, they looked at, the product, the innovation, comparables and competitors in the markets, how they were doing. Very rarely were they looking at cybersecurity and compliance. That has changed dramatically over the last couple of years. And for good reason, due to the increase in cybercrime and risk, and just how often this is happening to companies. It's business ending for multiple companies. At the very least, it's, it takes months, if not years, to recover from. So private equity firms and funds on down to family offices are now looking at how they can really value these target acquisitions or these portfolio companies. And so, they're bringing in evaluators that have the experience in cybersecurity, or they're bringing in an outside firm to come in and do that work for them to actually like make sense of the risk. So I'm not going to go into like the 7 to 10 different ways that companies are valued. We just don't have time for that, but I welcome those questions offline. Essentially, projected cash flow or actual cash flow. You're going to look at, what the company's capable of making or is making currently. There's some influence from comparables. Yes, that's like your top line baseline. And then they start looking at risk. And risk can happen a few different ways. Risk to market, risk to product, any other, risk, miscellaneous risk. There's cybersecurity risk built into that equation most of the time now. So an investor can utilize that risk against you to raise or lower the valuation, whatever makes most sense for them. As a business owner or CEO of a small growing company, or even the C-suite or board, I would recommend proactively approaching your cybersecurity risk. You do it a few different ways, but say if you were to bring in a consultant to do a risk assessment, you then know where you're weak, where you're strong, where you're vulnerable, and then they should be able to give you a letter of attestation, a forward-facing document that says we are working on these things. This is where we're at. This is who we employed. This is our roadmap. Most importantly, for valuation, you have a prioritized list of what you need to get done and how much that should cost you. And that's prioritized by risk and budget. So you're well equipped to negotiate your value based off of what you know to be true about your cybersecurity environment. If you don't know, that could cost you in the ignorance category. So it's important to know where you're at. It's also, recommended that if you don't have the money to bring an outside consultant to do a CIS assessment, a NIST assessment, any of those framework assessments that we talked about that are measured on controls, put anyone in charge of it. That's my advice on just about any webinar that I've been on. Aubrey knows this, we've been on a few. If you can't bring in a CISO, if you can't bring in a fractional CISO, that's okay and understood, especially when you're getting started in pre-revenue. Put someone in charge of it, someone that's passionate to chart. They can go to sans.org and they can build their own policies and procedures. Yes, it comes best from a consultant that takes in the needs of your organization and customizes it, but you can get started there. Training, cybersecurity awareness training can be from $0 per user to $4 per month per user. Get an attorney. I always recommend that, even if attorneys aren't on the panel with me, I do. Go interview attorneys, get one, on retainer that you trust, that you can call if there's a suspected breach or a breach, that can come in and guide you through the steps of the notification steps, what to say, who to call first. So definitely get an attorney. They'll help guide you. But essentially it's knowing what you have, knowing what you need to protect, how to protect it, giving your employees devices. We know it's expensive to go and order up some laptops for your employees. Obviously it's easier and better for you financially if they bring their own devices, but you need to provide the devices so you can monitor them. You can keep, make sure that there's no shadow IT on them. You can lock them down if they're lost or stolen. That goes to their cell phones as well. You can, be good stewards of your client and your vendor data that way. We can talk about other really low cost or free things. Just turn things on, turn on MFA. It's free for almost every software platform that you're running. So there's a lot of free or cheap things you can do. Again, get a CISO. If you can't afford a CISO, get a fractional CISO. If you can't get a fractional CISO, get somebody passionate on your team that's willing to roll up their sleeves, look at some free resources and just get started. Just know where you're weak, where you're strong, and just understand that you are an advocate in your own valuation. Know what things would cost to get them fixed, prioritize it based off of your budget, and just be prepared. if you enter those stages. But I will wrap it up with that because I know that was long-winded.
Yeah, and I think that what you said there is get someone, just assign it to somebody, and it's amazing. It's amazing what can happen if you just get somebody who's willing to ask the questions and wants to dig deep to find the answers. It's amazing what you can get done. So thanks for that. Another point that was brought up in the chat to me was valuations are associated with trade secrets too. And if companies pass these sort of certifications that you're mentioning, Tara, then it also improves valuation.
Absolutely, absolutely. It can, because basically you are as strong or as weak as, you know, your vulnerabilities and your risks. So if there's a comparable company that, you know, does everything very similarly to you do, but you're stronger from a cybersecurity perspective, you're going to be less risky. You're going to de-risk that investment for your investor, and you're going to stand out that way. And you can advocate for that. You know, we invest this much in cybersecurity. We understand it's important. Here's our letter of attestation where, you know, we're working towards a SOC 2. You don't have to be necessarily SOC 2 certified or have your report, but you can be working towards that, show that attestation, show that roadmap, show your commitment. And that's going to de-risk it for an investor. Investors love to be de-risked, you know, that gives them a lot of comfort. And so, you know, if they come in, and even if your innovation is better, you know, you're able to do really cool things. But if you open up a door to risk by them, you know, acquiring you or bringing them onto their list of portfolio companies, if you have the ability as a poorly run company to actually infect other portfolio companies, to infect your investor. So it's kind of like getting married, where you can bring on the positive assets and credit of your partner, or, you know, they can take away from yours. So it works very similar to a marriage in these type of examples. So we just encourage you to know what you're dealing with and be confident in that, and just put a plan together.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions. I know we're getting right up to the end of time, but before we go, before we answer those other questions, I want to leave time for Steve to talk about what he specializes in with his law firm.
What we enjoy at this stage, having practiced law for 35 years, is as a business lawyer, there are a whole range of opportunities, and prioritizing how you jump in and deal with the current state of affairs. My experience started after law school working for a federal judge, and then worked for two Fortune 100 companies, IBM and Altel, but in the IT space. And then I worked internationally in Asia for large international banks. And then the last 25 years has been devoted to business law from a law firm standpoint. And what we do is meet with clients and size up the issue. Of course, litigation and dispute resolution is always in the mix, but taking those proactive steps is what we have really enjoyed doing in anticipating where the problems may be from the experiences we've had, and identifying where those greatest risks are to shore up with contracts. Many of you startups out there are looking for an efficient way to get a services agreement in place that will cover your bases, will allow you to collect for services you provide, and then to bring in subcontractors or employees, and having that those templates or those contracts that you can use and customize to fit the needs for non-compete, and really be proactive in overcoming the many hurdles that can bog you down. And so that's our specialty, is being on the forefront in avoiding litigation by knowing where the holes are, and filling them with contracts and advice on structuring how you do a deal, how you buy or sell businesses, or put contracts together to shore things up. And that's the gratifying part at this stage of my career, to help businesses succeed from the get-go.
And you do a really good job. It's also interesting how businesses evolve over time, that those holes change. And unless you have your eye on the changing, atmosphere for business, it's impossible to plug all of the holes. So thank you for what you do. If it's okay with you guys, we're going to go 5 to 10 minutes over time. Does that work for the panelists? Are you guys okay with that? Okay, thank you. We just want to get a few more of these questions answered. Okay, so one question, and this is to all the panelists. Saw that 60% of startups who have a data breach go out of business in 6 months afterwards. Seems like the cost of legal in addition to the marketing hit is massive. What should we do if we experience a possible leak or attack?
I have a lot of feedback about that, but I typically defer to the attorneys on that one.
And what I would say is your incident response plan should have a section referring to how you classify the incidents, and through that classification process, whether or not there are any triggered legal obligations. So kind of the garden variety data breach that might occur for a startup, which startup may, if it's a startup that is, let's say, a software as a service provider, they're going to be collecting data belonging to people, usually, because they want to be able to provide a software service to people. And so if there's been a breach by a startup company, they may have a notification obligation to those people to whom the services are being provided. And that can become costly, but it can also be contained through understanding what was exposed, if anything, understanding beforehand, okay, what states are implicated based on the service we provide. Before you have an incident, do you know what data you're collecting, where it's being secured, and where it's coming from? And that's going to make and shorten and cheapen, or make cheaper, the analysis that you need to do in response to those types of obligations. I have seen startups have data breaches that could have been fatal, but the way they were able to recover was they actually used the data breach as a gift. In other words, they went around to all their new clients and said, hey, we promised to provide a service that does this, X, Y, and Z. In that process, some of your information was exposed through a vulnerability. It's not going to happen again. And here is why. And so that's not going to work for everyone. But if you are aggressive in your response and you work with counsel to formulate a plan that is doable and not going to break the bank, but that is tailored to the type of breach you're experiencing and the type of clients you're targeting, there is a way through. And in some instances, data breaches are a bit of a badge of honor because it means you're worth hacking. It means you provide services or have data that's valuable. And if you didn't, you wouldn't be a target. Now, of course, there's low-hanging fruit. If you're a company that's got access to funds and they find out about it, they're going to try and access that through a ransomware type of incident. But it's not all doom and gloom. It's like any trial that we go through, even as individuals. It's how you react. And I have seen companies, startups included, respond and recover well with the plan they set in place afterwards.
I'll add to that just very, very quickly the importance of getting a committee of 3 to 5 to assess all the facts and then come up with a proposed solution. What I find is I've recently went before a judge to talk about damages. And as I researched about this situation, data breaches are hard to prove damages. And that's a really problematic area. That's in your favor. So even though the data breach appears to be ominous, like Facebook's the damage element allows you to rectify it in a way that the remedial steps that Romaine mentioned could go a long way toward assuaging the court or the people. I've had so many of my clients say, all I want is for them to take my data more seriously. So many factors that as a group, key group of leadership, you can decide what additional risk you want to mitigate and try to resolve it and move forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Those are some really good answers. Let's see, another question. Let's see, what is offsite storage and when to consider this strategy? Now, I feel very thankful to the person who asked this question.
Did you ask yourself that question, Aubrey?
I did not. I did not, but it is really
question.
good for me to talk about. So real
Yep.
quick, what perpetual storage is, what I do here is we're one of the safest storage facilities in the world. We're safe from just about any natural disaster, man-made disaster. We're inside a mountain outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. So when the big earthquake comes, or the apocalypse happens, you'll know that, hey, maybe your data will outlive you. But so why offsite storage is important? It's always good to have one of your data sets offline and offsite. Offsite because if something were to happen to your building, it burned down, there's a flood, some kind of thing happens, or a burglary, right? You won't have to worry about your data being stolen if it's offsite and protected. Offline is important because that means it's not accessible to hackers, and that is definitely part of the cybersecurity conversation. And we're talking about systems and things like that. And we have that conversation more in these more technical conversations about cybersecurity, but that's what I do. And that's why it's important. So having a copy of your data offsite and offline will keep you protected. And what we like to say is that if you have a copy offsite and offline, if a hacker comes to you and says, you're going to pay me money so that I can give you your data back or give you access to your data back because I've got it all, then you can say, that's great, you keep that. I'm going to go over here and get my data that is offline and completely out of touch from you, and I'm going to rehydrate it back onto a clean stack that you have no access to, and you are not going to take that away from me. So that's what I do. That's why it's important. And I'm thankful to the person who asked that question because it lets me talk about what I love. So
Aubrey, isn't there some nonprofit you have as a neighbor that seems to believe and have the same thought process on preserving records? Yes,
thank you, Steve. Actually, so the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, if you're not from Utah, the LDS Church, it has its own vaults for storing genealogical records and its own church records inside the mountain. And they actually decided to build their vault before we did. We sold them the land originally. They were going to go on a worldwide search for the most safe geologic structure to create their vault. And then the geologist came back to them and said, well, you can search the world. However, you have one of the most one of the safest pieces of rock that you could build in anywhere. We're the safest, so we're the only commercially available place to build these kinds of vaults in the United States. And so that makes us one of the safest in the world because there's not many places that are built into this structure.
Right. We refer every client over to PSI. And the reason why we refer every client to PSI is because it's on every framework. Every single framework that we talked about today, even the ones we haven't talked about, it is a critical control if backups are being done, where they're being stored, if there's an offline copy, what referred to as air gapped. And so really any framework that you're going to get done is going to involve the work of PSI. And everyone on this call, I assume, have access to PSI right here in the state of Utah, which I think is pretty darn cool.
Thank you. Well, I mean, we've gone a little bit over. Tara Spalding at BoomStartup. How would you like to go from here?
Oh, I think this has been a fantastic presentation. Panelists, the most important thing is how can people get in contact with you or your company? So I'd love to just go down the row. Aubrey, for perpetual storage, how can they find out more about you or perpetual storage?
They can go to perpetualstorage.com. Or if you have questions about, you know, how we might be able to help you, you can email me directly at aubrey@perpetualstorage.com. My name is up there on the screen. So aubrey@perpetualstorage.com. That's how you get me.
Thank you. Romaine.
Oh,
Similarly, I can be found online with the law firm Polsonelli. It's an easy law firm to remember because it just has one name, Polsonelli. But I just joined this firm 2 to 3 weeks ago. We're a national firm, and so there's a bit to dig through on the website to get to me, but there's not many Romaines at this law firm. So,
Well, and people can connect with you also on LinkedIn, correct?
LinkedIn, of course. Yes, thank you, Tara. LinkedIn's
Of course.
easy and great.
Indeed. And Steve, how can they get a hold of you or your experts in your law firm?
Well, we are in Provo, Utah, and very accessible. With the last name Sumption is an English name. It is there's no other law firm by that name, but we would be happy to meet virtually or in person. Thank you.
Thank you. And my namesake, the better Tara. How can people get a hold of you and learn more about Framework?
Oh, that is all quite debatable, Tara. Actually, my kids just informed me that if you Google Tara Anderson cybersecurity, I pop up. And so does Framework Security. Yeah. So you can find the different ways to get a hold of me that way. Good, bad, and indifferent. LinkedIn's great for me. Our website is a little bit harder off the lips audibly. It's Framework SEC, like security, frameworksec.com. And yeah, just click on me and you can get right to me that way as well. But through all these great panelists, you know, I try to talk to them at least once a week if I'm smart. So you can get to me through any of them as well.
Well, I appreciate y'all's online participation and also to everyone who's stuck through. If you are interested in any of the upcoming online webinars that BoomStartup is hosting, please feel free to register at any time at boomstartup.com/BoomStartup events. In a few days, we have OpenUp trademark and trade dress. We're also going through global trends and opportunities for women in technology as well as in investing. And then on the 18th of October, we have transferring an LLC to a C Corp. I apologize for the cat meow. But anyways, it's been a total pleasure. And my guard cat is applauding you guys for such a wonderful webinar. And stay well. Thank you so much.
thank you so
Tara.
much.
Tara, for having us. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.